Hello, welcome to the Knife Yak channel. Today I'm going to talk about the Spyderco Sharpmaker. This is a very useful sharpening tool that I've been using for going on 30 years, so I have a lot of experience with this. I'm going to talk today about what it is, basically, how it works, and I'm going to give you some tips about how to get the most out of this sharpening tool. So let's talk first about what it is. The Spyderco Tri-Angle Sharpmaker is a sharpening rod system that consists of triangular shaped rods which come in two grits. You have a medium ceramic grit and you have a fine ceramic grit. And there is a plastic base which we will insert the rods into. You'll notice if you look, if I can get it up here closely so you can see it, you'll see that there's actually two sharpening angles available. So you can do a 40 degrees combined edge on this side, that's 20 degrees per side, or you can do 15 degrees per side for a total of 30 degrees inclusive, depending on which side you set your stones in. So yeah, we set the base down like that. We're just gonna do the 20 degrees per side or 40 degrees combined edge. We'll put the rods in like that. These brass rods are a safety feature, so they go into these two holes right here, and that just protects your hand as you're sharpening with your right hand. You can put your left hand here. If you're left-handed, you just turn it around and do it backwards. So this is the top or the lid of the case, and it goes here. And we'll hold the thing down with our left hand while we sharpen with our right hand, or vice versa. So yeah, these rods are intended to, if you accidentally come off the stone or maybe snag the blade and tip the thing over, this will just keep your hand safe because the edge won't be able to come in contact with your hand. So as you're sharpening, you just make you hold the edge of the blade vertically like this, so the spine is upwards, and you just basically draw the knife back and forth across these stones to create the sharpening bevel that you want, alternating like that. There's more to it than that, but that's the basic principle, right? So you have the triangle cross section, so you can sharpen either on the apexes, or I should say on the angles, the corners of the stone, or you can go on the flat side. And as you're sharpening, generally you'll start with the coarser stones, which is the gray ones, and you'll sharpen on the corners of the rods like that. And then as you are done with that, you'll turn them inwards, or I should say with the flat sides inwards. And so as you're sharpening on the flats, you'll get a slightly more refined effect. It won't dig in as much and it won't be quite as abrasive, right? So you'll use the corners for a rougher grit or a rougher effect, and you'll use the flat side for a finer effect. And then when you're done with those, you'll move to the white stones, which are fine grit. And so you'll do the same thing first on the corners and then on the flats like that. And by the time you're done, you'll have a fairly refined edge, but it'll be kind of toothy as well. So I really do like the finishing effect of these fine ceramics. Oftentimes that's fine enough and I don't have to polish the edge any further. But anyway, I'm going to give you a more thorough demonstration on the actual sharpening process. And the way I've just described it is just to give you an overview of the basic functionality. This Sharpmaker system is ideally suited for touching up edges that are already not too dull. It's not ideal for doing major reprofiling jobs or damage, cleaning up damage like on chipped edges, or removing large amounts of steel from a very, very dull knife. If you want to reprofile or create an edge, I don't recommend this tool, but it can work, but it just takes a long time because these abrasives are not all that coarse, and so it just takes a long time to remove lots of metal. This is called the Tri-Angle Sharpmaker, but I would rather call it the Sharp Keeper, assuming your knife already has an established edge bevel. Then you can use this tool to maintain that edge for a long time without having to reprofile. But if the knife is starting out completely dull, or if you don't like the edge that came from the factory and you want to flatten the angle, I would recommend that you use a diamond sharpening system. Anyway, I'll talk more about diamonds in a while, but yeah, so I don't use the Sharpmaker for major reprofiling. I use it more for touching up and maintaining edges that are already pretty well set. So I'm going to give you some tips and observations here. This system is quite simple in terms of the basic principle involved, but it's not brainless. So you still have to have a basic understanding of general sharpening principles. So you have to have the concepts that you will use on an ordinary bench stone or a fixed angle sharpening system applies to this exactly the same way. So you still have to understand the principles of what is an edge bevel and what is an apex, burr formation and reduction, the concept of the micro bevel, grit progressions, maintaining the consistency of sharpening angle during the process. All of those skills that you need to sharpen on a regular bench stone apply to this. Really, the only difference is that your angle of attack is different. So instead of sharpening horizontally, you're sharpening vertically, but you got the same kind of angles, the same kind of principles, and the same kind of process. One of the things that I would point out here is that these things are set at a predetermined angle, either the 40 degrees combined or the 30 degrees combined. And the problem is that most of your knives aren't going to be exactly 20 degrees or exactly 30 degrees. And the bevel that you're starting with, if you want to maintain that bevel, you'll have to tilt the blade either to the left or to the right of vertical in order to actually find and maintain the existing edge bevel. So if you don't care about the original bevel and you just want to go to the 20 degrees, then it doesn't really matter too much. But let's say you're not going to create the bevel at 20 degrees, but maintain it after you've got that bevel. You need to be able to find what I call the sweet spot. And what I mean by that is, if you consider this this edge bevel on your average knife, that's the part where you can see the light gleaming off of the edge there. We'll call that the secondary bevel. The primary bevel being the flat part of the blade from the spine downwards to where you get the actual edge and where you can see that light reflecting. That's what we're going to call the secondary bevel. And that secondary bevel is quite thin and narrow. And you want to be able to get that bevel to line up completely flat against the surface of the stone. And what I mean by that is it might not be exactly 20 degrees. And if you tilt the spine away from the stone, away from the rod slightly, you feel and hear the edge digging in. You can feel the friction and you can feel the edge biting into the surface of the rod. And if you tilt it the other direction, the spine towards the rod, you'll feel it kind of sliding. It's not the edge isn't exactly engaging the surface. And so somewhere between too flat and too steep, there's a sweet spot which is going to be exactly in alignment with this edge bevel. And in order to clarify that concept, let's imagine, let's have a look at this Mora companion, which has what we call a Scandinavian grind. which means, so you have the flat part of the spine, which is completely flat, right? There's no bevel there at all. And then the edge is actually this great big giant wide bevel here. And you can see the light reflecting off of that. Now, on most knives, this wide Scandinavian bevel would be the equivalent of this tiny edge bevel here, right? So if you were sharpening this Scandinavian grind on a typical stone or on this system, you could put the flat part of the spine, sorry, the flat part of the blade against the stone, and then tilt it towards the edge until you feel it stop. It'll just lock into place, right? You can just feel the difference of angle. There's flat, and then there's the beveled side right there. And so that's the angle you want, and that's your sweet spot. And if you're sharpening, you just want to stay right in that sweet spot where that edge is completely in alignment with the surface of the stone or rod. So on a non-Scandinavian or a standard kind of a ground blade, that if you can just imagine this being a very, very, very thin Scandinavian bevel. So if your knife is flat like that, it's going to be harder to feel, but there is a certain spot right there where that edge is engaged. And any more than that, and you're grinding off the apex of the edge. Any less than that, and you're grinding off the shoulder just above that grind. So you want to be able to, as you're making your strokes, you want to be able to learn how to feel that sweet spot and maintain that sweet spot angle as you sharpen. And that means you'll have to have a certain amount of stiffness or firmness in your grip and in your wrist and forearm, so you're not too floppy, right? You need to hold it not tightly but firmly, right? And you can look at it and see, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but as I'm looking downwards towards the interface between the rod and the edge bevel, I can see if that thing's touching the stone, or I can see if it's touching the rod or not, right? And I might be off this way a little bit or off this way a little bit, but I want to keep it completely flat against the rod with the spine of the blade more or less vertical, and I can feel the contact, right? And if I pay attention as I'm sharpening, I can hear and feel the consistency of that angle or that interface or that sweet spot, right? Too much and it'll sound raspy, and I can feel the vibration in my hand. It'll just be digging in and I can just feel it scratching, right? Any less than that and I'll get a different feel and a different sound. And so if you pay attention and if you practice, maybe practice on some dull knives that you don't care about, like some cheap kitchen knives or some, $8 hardware store knife that you buy just to practice on. You can practice finding that sweet spot and just listen and feel. It'll feel smooth in a certain way. And that's how you know you're keeping and finding that angle, right? And the trick, of course, is to maintain that same kind of angle and that same kind of contact with the same sweet spot on the opposite side as well. And this will feel different because when you're pushing, if you're right-handed and you're pushing towards the left side stone, it's strong. It's like a forehand stroke, right? And over here, it's like a backhand stroke, and it's going to feel different because you don't have the same kind of muscle groups working, and you're using a different part of your arm. But you can still hear it and feel it, and with practice, you'll become quite consistent. So just to summarize, right? As you're sharpening, and this is true of any kind of sharpening on any kind of stone, any kind of normal bench stone, or any kind of rod system, you want to be able to feel and hear the consistency of your strokes. That's how you know you're keeping the angle. Now you'll have to, there's this old trick we always use, where you can take a permanent marker, a Sharpie marker in this case, and let me just push this thing out of the way, and you can mark the edge with the Sharpie like that. So you have this black line there, right? Do that on both sides. Okay, so now when we're sharpening, we can just look and see if that black line gets wiped off or not. And that's how we can tell if we're actually meeting that angle that we have already established, assuming there is an edge already established. So as I'm sharpening, now I'm going to use the corners of the gray stones. These are the coarse rods. And now, having made my marks with the Sharpie, I'm just going to start grinding away, right? Now, this is going to be a little tricky for me because I have the camera set up between me and the sharpening system here. And so I'm going to try not to bump the camera while I do this. But if you follow the instructions that come with the sharpener system, they suggest that you do alternating strokes, one on the left, one on the right, and they say about 20 strokes should be about right. In my experience, if you're touching up an edge, that works great. If you're trying to establish an edge on a duller knife, rather than go back and forth, alternating like that with very light strokes, I will actually use slightly firmer strokes, and I'll just go back and forth along the edge on just one side. I usually start on the left rod, and you just go back and forth. Now, this is an advantage because if I stay on the stone, instead of going back and forth, I don't have to reset the angle every time. Once I get that set and locked in, I just kind of go back and forth until I can start to get used to that sound and that feel. And I can tell that the edge is right in that sweet spot, or the angle is just where I want it, and I can tell. Now I can just work whichever part of the blade is dullest, and if I want to do the tip, I'd go to the tip, and this part, I don't have to just do one stroke all the way from heel to tip like that, and I don't have to remove my blade from contact with the rod. I'm just going to go back and forth, up and down, keeping that angle. And I would use this same kind of technique on a horizontal bench stone as well. But I can just feel and hear that sweet spot kind of locking in, and I'll just make little adjustments, right? Now, as I do this over time, it might take a while. It could take 15 minutes, it could take 20 minutes, but I'll eventually feel a burr come up on the other side of the blade that I'm not sharpening. Right? I just feel it with my thumb, and I'll be able to feel a slight catch right there. And with your fingernail, you can perhaps feel a little edge right there that's kind of like curled up, and it's called a burr, right? So my goal here isn't to teach you how to do basic sharpening, but if you know what the burr is, you can feel it. You basically do one side until you start to get that burr. And if it takes a long time to get the burr on this side, then you can start to maybe do some strokes on this side just to keep things even, and then go back and do some on this side, and eventually you'll get the burr on one side and then the burr on the other side. Right, now we can inspect our edge, and you can see that I've already scratched off most of that Sharpie marker. There's a little tiny bit right up here at the top of the edge bevel where it hasn't gotten scraped off yet, but you can see I've kept a pretty good that's pretty much the angle I wanted, because it basically rubbed off the ink. Now you can see there's still some ink over here, right? Now if I wanted to work on that part alone, I just concentrate on that, right? So you can get a lot more done more quickly. You know, if you're doing these long strokes like that, it takes forever to get that little bit. But if I just focus on that, just find my angle, and then just kind of go there and just rub on it, right? Firmly, but not too hard. Let the abrasive do the work, right? And so now we can see that that's starting to clean that off, right? Now, another thing you want to think about as you're doing this is you want to keep the rod in contact. You want to keep the edge in contact at the same angle all the way to the tip. And because many knives have curvature along the towards the tip, usually it's straight back here, and there's a little bit of curvature here. As you're making your strokes, you'll bring your hand back straight for the straight part, and then as you get towards that curved belly, you'll bring your hand, the handle of the knife, inwards slightly, and that compensates for the curvature of the edge along this up towards the tip of the knife, right? So as you come back, you want to bring your hand towards, bring your hand inwards as you come across that belly or along that belly, and that will help you maintain the same consistent angle all the way. As if you're doing this on a conventional flat bench stone, right? It's going to look different. But if you're sharpening horizontally like this, as you get towards the belly, you're going to raise the handle slightly so that you can keep that same contact with. If you just did it straight like that, you're going to just flatten off this part, or maybe scratch the face of the blade instead of engaging with the edge, right? So the same way we would lift our handle slightly as we go into the curvature on the Sharpmaker, we're going to do the same thing, but instead of raising our hand like this, we're going to bring our hand inward, and that accomplishes the same effect, right? Now, as we're doing this, you want to be very careful not to drag the tip all the way across the rod, because if you do that, if you're not paying attention, or if you try to get all the way to the tip, this thing will come across like that, and over time, every time you come across that tip like that, that's going to round off the tip, and you'll eventually have a curve, like a flattened, blunt, or rounded off tip, right? So you really have to stop just before you get to the tip. You can get close, but don't go past, right? Don't come off the rod. So we're gonna do this on both sides, right? So I'll just do this until I get a burr on the opposite side, and then I'll do this until I get the burr on the other opposite side. And when I'm done with that, I'll turn the stones so that I got the flats inwards, right? And I'll just do the same thing, right? Now, when I'm sharpening it, the first part of the process, I'm just going to go back and forth on one side, and then back and forth on the other side, concentrating on the parts of the blade that are not sharp yet. And you just keep doing that. The farther along you go in the process, the lighter your strokes will be, till they're just very, very light and very feathery. And then I start to alternate, right? So at first I'm doing one side with firm strokes, right? And then the farther I go, then I start alternating, and my strokes become lighter. And that's how we control the burr, so that the burr will be reduced and even, and it won't be flopped over to one side or the other. Okay, so when we're done with these, then we go to the white rods. We'll start with the corners, do the same thing. Now, here we've already kind of established the edge, so on this case I might actually start just alternating like that, since I've already got the burr. And now we're just maintaining we're just refining the scratch pattern, and we can do up and down and rubbing like that if you want. But the farther into the process you go, the more you'll just alternate one stroke to each side. And again, paying attention to the tip, right? You might do the tip separately if you need to, but you just pay attention to the, you can look at your Sharpie marker line, or just pay attention to the feel, right? So when I'm done with that, I'll turn them, I'll work the flats like this, right? Now with the flat side, it's easier to control the tip, because as you bring the blade downwards and bring your handle inwards, you just stop when you get to the middle of the stone. Stop right there. Don't bring it off the stone like that, but just stop when you get to the middle of the stone on either side. Stop in the middle, right? So by this point, we're just going to be doing, alternating like this, right? Now it takes practice, and there's some muscle memory involved, and it's a skill that you acquire, and it takes practice. Okay. I mentioned the pressure, right? So yeah, at the beginning of the process, the pressure could be more firm, and as you get closer to being done, you want very, very light, feathery strokes, just as light as you can do, so that the blade is just barely touching, and it's just feathery and very light, right? And that's how you can maintain the consistency on both sides. If you're pressing hard, it's harder to remove that final little tiny residual burr. Okay. I'm going to call that good for now. And I'm going to make a couple of additional videos, and I'm going to make them separate because I don't want this to be too long. But in the next video, I'll talk about how to sharpen serrations. Okay, so tune in for that, and I'll see you next time.